infrastructure, do not have a government providing services, for example, for people. And we saw even in Tunisia, you had some radical people stepping in to fill in services, social services, even that the government should be providing. So when there's a void, you have these terrorist groups, non-state organizations, I might underline as well, that do not adhere to any of our international agreements, that are under no legal obligation to fulfill anything. And they're very dispersed, they're very disorganized, which makes them much harder to combat.
You mentioned the provision of things such as social services, that broad spectrum. The Taliban, of course, doing that in the Swat Valley, stepping in and seeing the need.
And even in Pakistan,
and winning hearts and minds
well.
in that sense, a very clever tactic in many ways. Hamas doing a similar thing in Gaza, of course. Let's turn our attention to Syria and the situation there and bring back Miriam Benrad, who is joining us by Skype from Marseille, research fellow on the Middle East at SERI. Miriam, I hope you can hear us. We tried to improve the line to you because the reception wasn't very good for our first part, but we'll try again and see how it goes. In terms of what happens next in Syria, Miriam, did you see Al-Qaeda really exploiting what appears to be a bit of a void there?
Well, Al-Qaeda has been both exploiting, as mentioned by some of the participants, the Arab Spring and its aftermath, the political difficulties met by a certain number of the states in the Middle East region, and also the economic difficulties, which, of course, helped the recruitment of the organization. Al-Qaeda has also benefited from the American disengagement from the Middle East, which is clear through Obama's strategy today, in particular in Iraq. And today, the organization is clearly, as I already mentioned, making of Syria its priority, with a lot of various organized networks between Iraq and Syria since 2003, since the overthrow of the Saddam Hussein regime in Iraq, with a number of weapons and fighters going back and forth between the two countries. And what I would like also to say regarding the strategy of Al-Qaeda, I think that the way the organization is structured is very important, because beyond the central command, which is located in the Afpak region around Zawahiri and other leading figures, I think it's important to underline that most Al-Qaeda affiliates act in a very autonomous way with their own capabilities on the ground. And it's very clear, for instance, in the case of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which is now named the Islamic State of Iraq and has merged with Jabhat al-Nusra in last April to wage a common jihad in Iraq and Syria in order to reestablish the caliphate. It's the ultimate objective of the organization. And of course, the Western presence is perceived, the American one, but also anything that has to do with the West is perceived as an obstacle to the realization of this ultimate objective, and hence the renewed threats and the fact that the U.S. closed their embassies and other Western embassies, which is understandable also because Ramadan is a very symbolic date, generally with over the last years renewed attacks also during this period.
Miriam, thank you very much indeed. We've had another tweet coming in from viewers, and thank you for your tweets. It's great to get your response. Alvin McRae saying it's amazing how terrorists in tents in the desert have the power to shut down US embassies and trade missions. The paper mice that roars is Alvin McRae's response there. Let's bring in Scott Bates from the Centre for National Policy over there in Connecticut. Scott, in that tweet perhaps hitting a bit of a point there about the unpredictability of these groups, and reinforcing what Miriam was saying there in Marseille about the fact they act in an autonomous, independent way, but always with the same kind of aim.
Well, what Miriam's hit on is something very important, which is that Zawahiri is trying desperately to reassert some kind of relevance or central control. He's been in contact with Al-Qaeda in Yemen saying, do something. You know, he's trying to demonstrate he can still throw a switch and make something happen. So it'll be very interesting if this comes to nothing. That will clearly expose the real capabilities of Al-Qaeda Central at this point. I think that, the tweet that just came in is a very important one, which is the U.S. really does have to find a way to calibrate its responses rather than shutting down 20 embassies.
Would you say it was an overreaction, sir?
Well, I would say that, we value American lives very highly, absolutely. But, everybody that serves in those embassies knows the risk. They know the job that they must do. And I think the president should probably, he did a good job at the National Defense University saying we have to recalibrate the war on terror, that Al-Qaeda is degraded. The second part of that is going to be saying, this threat will exist for a couple of decades more. It's a potent ideology that will always have adherents. We can't guarantee total security, yet we can guarantee our response, and we can guarantee that we won't be swayed from our positive role in the world. And, that comes with risks. So no president, no leader in any country can guarantee total security. David Cameron can't do it. In the UK on a street, how are you going to know about all those things? So things are always going to happen, yet we can control our reaction and our policies. And in that way, we always defeat Al-Qaeda.
Scott, thank you. France, of course, very much on the Al-Qaeda hit list, notably over Mali, and, of course, over the issue of the Islamic veil being banned in public places. Didier, just bringing you in on this one, because clearly this is an issue that affects many Muslim faithful in France. It's an issue that, of course, reverberates around the Muslim world. Do you think maybe France was wrong to take the stance it took on, say, for instance, the Islamic veil?
The problem with this kind of subject is that it is social. It is supposed to target communitarism. If communitarism exists, it's for social, economic, political reasons. It's not by a law that you will make communitarism disappear. If we truly want to make sure there is no tensions between communities, try to strengthen the interfaith groups that could exist, try to leave also people some freedom. I will be influenced by the American mindset here. Let freedom bloom, and people will make choices by themselves. Maybe one generation will wear the burqa. Maybe the second generation will go train in Harvard and will forget about everything that is more fundamentalist. We have seen it with other communities elsewhere. Here we should be careful about imposing laws that sound good at an internal level. But the burqa issue was already a hot issue for the French foreigners working in South Asia. People were talking a lot about it, and they became target because of that. When we play this kind of political games inside a country for no real reason, again, we talk now about a university level. The university level means that we are talking about adults making their own choice. I'm not a big fan of a burqa myself, but I totally understand that people want to wear it as a way to express their own choices, their own religious choices. And we should better go this way than to try to impose laws on people. It never works well.
You can wear what you like in the UK, of course. Let's bring in Olivier Guitta, who is at the Henry Jackson Society there, joining us from London. Yeah, you can wear the burqa in the UK. It doesn't matter, does it? The UK is very liberal about these kinds of things, but that didn't stop the attack on Lee Rigby. It didn't stop the attack on the London transport system back in 2005. It seems that no matter what happens, this type of extremist will always find a way to express itself and find a reason for expressing itself.
Right. I mean, literally the ideology of restoring the Western Caliphate is really potent in the minds of a lot of jihadists. Obviously, if you look at Europe, Spain is the main prize at this point. So if you were to think about a country that could be targeted for ideological reasons, then Spain obviously would be the first one. But I agree with you. I mean, they will always find a reason to attack us. But at this point, it is true that as far as the wherewithal and the operational capacity that they have, it's way easier to attack in Yemen than to attack in London at this point. But The issue is really about Al-Qaeda gaining ground in Yemen, gaining ground also in Libya. That's one country that you didn't mention earlier when you talked about North Africa. Libya is the biggest country as far as Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. Most of the operatives, including Mukhtar Bel-Mukhtar, that was behind the In Amenas hostage crisis, are now in the Libyan desert. Libya has the largest weapons stock pile in one of the largest in the world. Libyan weapons are all over the place. I would put to you that Yemen and Libya are the two hotspots for the coming months.
So, Ellen, I sent you to pick up on that one. I was just going to say, so, you know, maybe there was a point to having Muammar Gaddafi in power. He could keep a lid on this kind of thing. I don't think anybody seriously thinks that was a good idea to keep him in power, but that was how he served the West in some way.
Well, sure, some of these dictators that were there were to keep a lid on, even in the former Soviet countries, of which I know a bit more. They were strongmen. The hetman was there to keep a lid on things and keep people in line. And you saw, too, if I can just take the Libya, and I'll go back. I'd like to go back to Benghazi and follow up on what Scott Bates said.
Please.
But Libya, the highest literacy rates compared to what you have on both sides, even in Algeria and certainly in Tunisia. So it was keeping people down, submitted, and poor. If I can just go back to the point, and maybe this will wrap this up quite nicely, is that what Scott said earlier about Benghazi, I think we have Benghazi as an example. In fact, the new FBI director coming in is asked to provide a report 30 days from now of what happened, because we still don't know who committed this attack in Benghazi. So this overreaction, if we can say it as that, in shutting down these 21 embassies is probably, there's a reason for it, and they said the chatter was higher, et cetera. But I'd like to go back to a point and follow up on what Scott said as well, is that the U.S. provides an enormous amount of foreign assistance as well, and going to your point as well, DJ, saying that they provide, for example, $3 billion in health assistance, in economic development, it's $2 billion, and humanitarian assistance, it's $1 billion, and peace and security, $378 million. But it's interesting to see which countries receive this aid, and Afghanistan is the first on the list with $3.9 billion, then Pakistan with 3.1, Israel, $3 billion, and Egypt with $1.3 billion. You notice, too, that we said, well, we wouldn't, because of what was going on in Egypt, give them the aid. And then you had Saudi Arabia step in and give them a big envelope while the U.S. is thinking about, are they doing the reforms? Are they going down the democratic pathways? You so rightly said, DJ, so are they going towards the rule of law, et cetera? So these are factors to consider, too, as the U.S. closes its embassies, as Ramadan finishes tomorrow, I might add. So they have obviously got reasons to do this. And maybe it's in light, again, of this Benghazi affair, that they rather would be safe than sorry.
Indeed. Al-Qaeda and us, how world terror is reshaping all our lives, reshaping all our outlooks. Scott, I understand you were itching to join in that conversation as Ellen was speaking. Go ahead.
Well, I guess so. You know, I agree. I think that Benghazi has put everybody in the United States on alert that there are still dangers to our diplomats out there, and the investigation goes on. But, you know, again, I think it just points out, as you mentioned, U.S. foreign aid is tilted to a few nations in the region, and we need a recalibration so that we're seen as being on the side, and this goes to the West generally, of average people that are aspirational in the region. Because if we tie ourselves to any one leader, I think we're going to see, certainly over the next 5 to 10 years, those leaders are going to come and go, those movements are going to change and morph, and no one has a lid on anything. So us in the West, long term, need to remain engaged, need to spread out our assistance a little bit and talk to a lot of people in the region. And yes, that will entail a lot of risk for all of us, yet at the same time, longer term, we'll have better intelligence, better knowledge of the region, and be able to base our reactions more on fact and less on fear.
Let me bring to you all the latest tweet coming in from someone calling themselves Roughneck36. Who else thinks that the recent terrorist threat based upon unprecedented Al-Qaeda chatter is just propaganda to justify the NSA spying program? Thank you for that tweet. Let me throw that one open to our panel. Does anybody believe that this could be a kind of counterplay to justify what's been said and done about Edward Snowden? I'm opening it to you all. The first person to speak will get the floor. Okay, I'll nominate Didier.
Thank you so much. I do want to insist on the fact that
it is something that comes to mind, though, isn't it? Maybe this is a kind of counterplay, you know.
I could say it's a joke, but I want to go back to the US at some point, so it will not be seen as badly what I am about to say. But it will be a clever way to do it. I mean, you can have a real threat at the same time you can overreact and insist a little to make people understand that it's not done by a big bad government that wants to control everything like in some complotist theory. That it is linked to real threat and real issues, and also real interest from an American point of view, which is totally understandable. We have a problem maybe in Europe to be unhappy with the US defending their own interests, maybe because
and those of their allies, I might add.
The Europeans,
fair point.
The Europeans should be able also to defend their own interest, maybe because we are disconnected from history. We have a tendency to criticize the US for doing something that we would like to do ourselves.
After the PRISM scandal, of course, it emerged that France had been engaged in similar activities and maybe gone a little bit further.
Oh, exactly.
So clearly, it seems that every government's up to it. Now, maybe people were surprised by the scale, maybe they weren't. Certainly a lot of people that I know said, well, didn't we know this was going on anyway? Olivier Guitta in London, is that something that maybe occurred to you, that what was revealed by the NSA, PRISM, Edward Snowden affair really didn't shock you?
No, not really. Because if you really look at what's been happening in the past few weeks, there have been signs of Al-Qaeda really ramping up. And I'm talking about the jailbreaks. The jailbreaks in Iraq, in Libya, and in Pakistan were, for us, signs that Al-Qaeda was back on the action and getting 500 main operatives from Iraq out, 1,200 in Libya, and in Pakistan also a handful of 100. Then within 3 or 4 days, Al-Zawahiri coming with a tape. All this were signs that something big was in the back burner. And the fact that there have been so many operatives going around is telling us at this point that this is just the beginning. We're going to see much more in the coming weeks and months, possibly attacks in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, in North Africa. So I think this is just the beginning. It has nothing to do with the NSA scandal at this point.
You mentioned, Olivier, those particular countries. Do you see the Al-Qaeda reach, the Al-Qaeda attack network going beyond that, going to other countries, going into the West? I don't want to mention countries just in case it gives somebody an idea, but you know what I'm getting at.
Yes, indeed. There are troublesome intelligence regarding countries not far from us as far as the risk is concerned. Obviously, Spain that I mentioned earlier could be one of them. There were incidents in Ceuta not a few weeks back that are really a little bit of an avant-garde of what could happen. European security officials are very much monitoring what's going on in the region, and I suspect that everybody is on high alert at this point.
And if I can just say, too, that it's, because of economic and political instability, when you see 50% of the youth, for example, in Spain, to your point, Olivier, and then political turmoil, for example, even in Italy, we don't talk about. What about Greece? These are countries, too, on the southern borders closer. And I did a study on immigration, and all of it's coming through Turkey, for example. 33% of the immigration coming into Europe is through Turkey. So there's this southern border, if you will, a Mediterranean border that really is unstable, and politically as well. Look at the scandals, too, going on.
It's that type of detachment that Alan was talking about there, the unemployment, the social deprivation. These are the things that Al-Qaeda, DDA, has traditionally been able to tap into, isn't it?
Definitely, and that's why I insisted time and again to say that we should not focus on hotspots. What will happen in 1 month, in 2 months is very interesting. The goal is to eradicate the movement, meaning that we need to continue to work in the places that are not fashionable anymore. We forgot about Libya at the moment the actions from the French army were done. We should not have forgotten about Libya. We should continue to focus every single day about Libya. What is going on in Afghanistan is very important. In Pakistan, even more important. Not to criticize always the governments. We have a tendency to want the Pakistani or the Afghan government, for example, to look like Switzerland. They will not be for a couple of 100 years at best. We need to focus on how to help them to stabilize their country. You had one study in one American think tank saying that if Afghanistan looks like Bangladesh in the next 10 to 20 years, it will already be a success. So let's try to help them help themselves, being in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Libya, Mali, everywhere.
I don't think we've solved the world's crisis, but we've heard some lively opinions and thrashed through a number of issues here regarding Al-Qaeda and the United States. I'd just like to thank all our guests for joining us this evening. I'll start with those joining us from afar. Miriam Benrad by Skype from Marseille. Thank you, Miriam, for joining us. Miriam, of course, Research Fellow at the Siri Institute, Specialist on the Middle East. Thank you for joining us. We had by satellite from London, Olivier Guitta from the Henry Jackson Society. Thank you, sir, for your opinions. And thank you for sharing them with us here on France 24. Pleasure having you. And Scott Bates, of course, joining us from Hartford, Connecticut by Skype from the Centre for National Policy. Thank you once again. And here in the studio, final word, I'll give it to you, Alan. What do you see happening over the next, say, I don't know, decade in terms of this struggle? And if you could be brief, and I know it's a big answer you're going to give us, go ahead.
I'll be very brief. The economic and social trends, even in looking in some of these southern Mediterranean countries where am working in the Mediterranean and in the Black Sea, meaning that economic and political problems have to be solved first. Young people have to have jobs. Young people have to have education where they can access jobs. A lot of countries have high education standards or very low education standards. And I might mention again, our security threats are not coming also from the outside, but from the inside, principally in the forms of illiteracy, hunger, poverty, etc. So we have to build our communities inside and to ensure security inside and outside.
Ellen Weslina, thank you very much.
You're very
Didier Schud on the other side of the studio, thank you too. And thank you for watching and responding to this debate here on France 24. Stay with us.